Okay, grade 9, this is lesson number 2, Evidence for Evolution, part 1. We'll be going over this 2 parts. Obviously, part 1. Part 1 is today, and part 2 will be happening for you guys later this week on Wednesday. Okay, so here we go. We'll start off, of course, with our template. So this is a 2-pager, and you might even need a 3rd page to answer some questions, depending on how small your notebook is and how big your writing is. Make sure you don't have to write down every single thing that is said in the video, right? You need to summarize key points, but you want to have space here for some discussion evidence. This is a bigger one. Anatomical should take up more space than embryological. There's 3 parts to this and only 1 part to this. And you do have to do a drawing for each of them, so make sure you leave yourself space for that. So pause the video now and make your template. Okay, so hopefully now you've made your template and we can talk about the different kinds of evidence for evolution. So, evolutionary biology is a really important branch of biology, and it's one of the main kind of central tenets of biology, a thing that connects all the different fields of biology together, including ecology we spoke about earlier this year. So, scientists who have worked in this field, they've analyzed tons and tons of different kinds of evidence about evolution. Some of these kinds of evidence we're going to talk about were ones that Darwin and Wallace both analyzed because they had the ability to do so at that time and that was available to them. But some of these we're going to talk about, a lot, but are going to be more modern things that are more technology-based, that Darwin and Wallace just couldn't see them. They were too small, they were too complex to understand that there was something missing there. So we're going to go through several different examples, 6 examples, in fact, in this course. There are many other evidence for evolution that exists out there. We're only going to go through 6, okay? Now, because we call it the theory of evolution, the word theory in science, okay, that is a loaded word. It's a very specific meaning, and it's because we have all of this really comprehensive, so many examples, different kinds of types of examples, different places in the world, and it's consistent evidence that always leads to the same kind of conclusions, that evolution is a theory. Okay, it's a theory of evolution because we have all of this comprehensive examples. It's not a hypothesis. So think for a minute, what does the word theory mean in the context of science? So pause the video and think for a minute to yourself, what does the word theory mean if I'm talking like a scientist, thinking like a scientist? Okay, so hopefully the idea that a theory in science is not just an idea, it's a very well supported idea. In fact, the best way to kind of think of it is multiple hypotheses that are supported by repeated testing. So lots and lots of testing has happened and we have the same answer all the time, and that's what elevates things to a theory. Now, the reason we don't call it a fact is because the nature of science is to always be questioning, to never be 100% sure of anything. So we're always trying to see new evidence, new things to analyze, new problems to see, new experiments to do, and see if we're getting the same results again. If we do, that just strengthens our theory. And if we don't, then we immediately start looking at our theory and looking for what may have caused this to happen, what's missing here. Okay, so the first kind of evidence we're going to talk about is geographic evidence. So this is very much connected to the environment. So the environment and the organisms who live in it, that's the connection between the two of them is what we would call a key tenet to evolutionary biology. So the idea is a really important component of evolutionary biology. Darwin's and Wallace's idea of the different species they saw on the different islands they went to or down to their environment, that's a key factor here. And geographic evidence is talking about the connections between the environment and the organism. So around the world, what they found is that similar organisms who live in similar places have similar adaptations, so similar structures to live in those different places. Even though they're completely unrelated, they tend to have similar adaptations, and that's one piece of geographic evidence. The other piece of geographic evidence is that, when organisms move to a new environment over many, many generations, many hundreds and thousands and millions of years, it will adapt to its new environment. So in this picture here, this is one of the pictures you could possibly draw. It's up to you to pick. So this is one of them. We have a common ancestor here, kind of a rat-like ancestor, and then as that ancestor, many millions of years ago, move to different environments, like up here to Canada, North America, or then down to South America, it's going to adapt because the environments are going to be different. So here we have the instance being a beaver. So lives in the aquatic environment, builds a dam, has this kind of wider tail, still the same kind of teeth happening here, different claws, different face shape, snout shape. And then down in South America, we have a capybara and we have a koipu. This is an aquatic rat, just like the beaver, but a slightly different because it's a different environment. And the capybara is on land. So all these evolved from a similar kind of common rat ancestor. And because they moved to different environments, they, over many, many, many generations, in a very long time, slowly adapted and changed their traits until they became these very different ones we have today. Okay, the environment is what dictated how they changed. Some other examples. So here we have 4 unrelated organisms. They're not connected at all, live in separate continents. So we have the giant armadillo from North America, the giant anteater from South America, the giant pangolin from Africa, and the spiny anteater from Oceania from Australia. They all live, though, in very similar environments. The same kind of environment exists in multiple places on our planet, and they all eat ants and small insects. So you take a minute and look at the pictures of them. What do you notice is similar about them? The most obvious thing you should notice is they all have this long kind of snout, okay? And they also don't have teeth, and they just have a really long tongue that allows them to get at ants. So even though they're totally unrelated, they have a similar adaptation because they have a similar environment and a similar prey source. Here's another example here of the Hawaiian honeycreeper. These even live in Hawaii, in the different islands there. And we had some sort of founder bird species, a common ancestor, that first moved to the Hawaiian Islands. And as more islands kind of came up, and there's more habitat, they were able to disperse, the population grew because there's less limiting factors. Hopefully your ecology is coming back to your mind right now. And they adapted to have different bill shapes or beak shapes based on what they're eating. So this side here, these 4 all eat fruit and seeds. So you can probably guess the ones with the really big and strong beaks are going to be the ones eating seeds. They had to break through that kind of tougher shell of a seed, whereas these ones, the longer curved beaks, are going to be trying to get at fruit. What about over here on this side? What do these ones eat? Pause the video and think about it. Okay, so we have some that eat insects and nectar. So the ones that eat insects are going to be this one and this one with the more straight beaks, pointed, so they can get through an insect shell, quite strong. And then we have the nectar eaters, have to have a long beak to get into the center of a flower and suck the nectar out. So this is a nectar eater, and this is also a nectar eater. So they had a common ancestor, but they moved to a different environment, and that caused them to have these different traits evolving based on what they were eating. Okay, so that's geographic evidence. Remember, you can pick to draw either this drawing, this image, or this image. You pick the one you want to draw in that first box. Okay, the next set of evidence is anatomical evidence. So, for a long time, for many, many hundreds and thousands of years, scientists and just people who are curious noticed things about the anatomy, and in particular the bones of different species. So if you're a hunter or you're a butcher or a farmer and you're killing species, you're probably going to notice their bones. And you notice similarities between them. So we can look and see these patterns among species that seem very different today, but they maybe have a common ancestor, or they have non-common ancestor but live in the same kind of environment and have similar traits. So there's 3 main types of anatomical evidence we're going to talk about. We have homologous structures, analogous structures, and vestigial structures. So we're going to start with homologous structures, and homo means the same. Remember your prefixes, guys. Homo means the same. Oops. Okay. It's still not good, is it? Let's try it again. There, that's better. So they have the same structure, but they perform a different function. Oh, Carl, look, here's a typo. Just for you, Carl. Okay, so they have the same structure, but they perform a different function. So take a look at these examples here. This is called the pentadactyl limb, and penta means 5. So each of these different limbs here, if you look at them, they all kind of have 5 fingers, 5 joints at the end, or they used to anyway. So I want you to take a look at this diagram and try and figure out what is the function. So they have to have the same structure but a different function. So these all have one big bone at the top, then 2 bones next, and then they have many small bones and some longer ones after that. So this kind of breakdown shows that these organisms have a homologous structure. But what is the functions of each one? So the function of the human hand is to grasp things. The cat would be to climb and jump, bats to fly, porpoises to swim, and horses to run and gallop. So very different functions, but they have a very similar structure. This means that all these species had a common ancestor. So at some point millions of years ago, there was some sort of common ancestor that all of these species evolved from, and that common ancestor had a pentadactyl limb. And the cat adapted it to climbing, the bat adapted it to flying, the porpoise adapted it to swimming, we adapted to grasping things, horses adapted to running really fast. So everyone adapted differently. And those are homologous structures, okay? Same structure, different function. Okay, other kinds of anatomical evidence. Analogous structures. So analogous is where they have a similar function but a different structure. So a good example here are wings. So insect wings, a bat's wing, this is a pterodactyl wing, and a bird's wing. They all perform the same function for the same environment, which would be the air, but they all have different structures. So it proves that nature has different ways that we can evolve to have the same solution, same problem. So the problem is, how do I fly? How do I get into the air and survive in that part of my environment? And it's not just one way to make a wing. There's 4 different ways to make a wing. Okay, the last one are vestigial structures. So vestigial structures are those that organisms have that are present in their body, but they have no function. So you can kind of think of them as leftovers from a previous ancestor. So if you look here at a whale, here's a whale skeleton. If you've ever seen one in real life, they're amazing. They're so long and giant, it's crazy. And you'll notice here, these bones right here, that's the pelvis bones. Whales don't need a pelvis. What's attached to our pelvis bones? Think about it for a second. That's where our legs are attached. Whales do not have legs, they do not need a pelvis, and this bone isn't attached to anything, just floating there, because it's no longer functional. It means whales had an ancestor that did have legs. And if you ever see a whale skeleton, and I was lucky to see one a few years ago in a museum in Toronto, the pelvis bone is there, and it's just floating there. It's not necessary, it's not hurting, it's not helping, it's just a vestigial structure. So take a minute and summarize for yourself, how do these 3 different types of anatomical structures provide evidence for evolution? Pause the video and think about it. So in my vestigial and my homologous structures, they provide evidence of a common ancestor, that the organisms changed over time and their ancestor had some sort of traits. So for whales, they had a common ancestor with organisms that have a similar skeleton and have a pelvic bone, even though they don't need it. And for analogous, it's providing evidence that the environment is what dictates evolution and that multiple solutions can be found to the same problem, multiple ways to have a fin, to have a wing, to have a mouth that will eat meat, different solutions to the same problem. Okay, let's talk about embryological evidence. So embryos are what happens after the sperm fertilizes an egg, then it will start to develop into an embryo. And many scientists have analyzed embryos. Aristotle started to do it many, many hundreds of years ago, but he didn't have really enough evidence to do this in particular detail. So as we developed microscope technology and further kind of visualization software and technology, we've been able to analyze and preserve embryos much better and learn much more about them. So take a look at these 5 different embryos. We have here a fish, a salamander, a tortoise, a chick, and a human. This is all the same stage of development here, and then here, and then here. So take a minute, take a look at them, and what do you notice? Pause the video. What do you see? So hopefully you were noticing the crazy similarities here, right? They all at the start look very similar, with a similar kind of shape to the head, the long kind of curving tail-like structure for each one. Okay, and as they develop, they get totally different by the end. But the ones that are here are more closely related. They have more similar traits as you go along. So it's showing just 5 stages, and there actually are more species that are similar as well. So these are homologous structures. These are very similar between them. They have different functions, but similar structures. It means they're homologous. Something that's really interesting to notice is every species here, they all have gill slits. We all had gill slits when we were an embryo, but we no longer have them as adults. Why do you think we would have gill slits? Well, obviously our common ancestor that we used to have had gills, and we evolved from that common ancestor for many, many billions of years and retained the gill slits as an embryo. We don't need them as fully developed babies. We don't need them as individuals, but we have them early stages of embryonic development, and they slowly kind of disappear as we develop. Same thing with a chick. It has gill slits, even though it doesn't need gills. It doesn't live in the underwater. Remember, gills are how fish and some of the other species, how they breathe underwater. Okay, so you can draw, just a drawing of this one, you don't have to draw all of them. Draw a human and something else, at least 2 species to show, okay? Okay, so common ancestry is the evidence here. So that's the end of the lesson part for today. The second task you have to do today is you need to practice analyzing evidence. So we have 3 different types of evidence for you to analyze, and there's questions for you to do for each one. You're welcome to talk to somebody else. In class, I encourage you to talk to somebody else. Maybe do your little Zoom and put the slides up, put the images up for you to look at, and that way you have that information to help you. Okay, but you need to practice and answer the questions in your notebook. So the first one is this slide. It's showing geographic evidence of the different beaks. There are all these different species of Galapagos finches, also known as Darwin's finches, and he analyzed their beaks very closely in his research. And there's 3 questions to answer. The next one is anatomical evidence. So we have fins to compare. You have to answer 2 questions with the fins, and then tailbone to compare, answer 2 questions about tailbones. And then we have embryological evidence, so here's a little more detail about more species embryos, and 3 questions to answer. That is your task. It should take you, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, and we will go over them as a class later on this week, but for now, I want you to just try and answer them yourself in your notebook, and then upload. Your homework is to complete today's lesson in your notebook, and upload with the good images, and upload all those pictures of your notes, as well as your analysis of those 3 stations. We'll do 3 more stations next class. Okay, as always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Email your teacher, and good luck. Stay safe, stay home, try to get out of your pajamas and have a shower. Have a good one, guys.